I'm Sean Bose, concert visual designer in Los Angeles, California. Today, we're talking to Alon Hammer, aka Rem. Alon is a visual artist based in the LA area. He is an expert in the worlds of projection mapping and real-time generative content. You've seen his work at festivals like Modem, Boom, and he also joined Datagramma at Tipper and Friends. Incredible stuff. He's pushed the boundaries in virtual production and XR as well. He holds the title currently of Chief Technical Officer at Magic Box, which is a mobile virtual production studio for motion pictures, TV, commercials, experiential marketing, all that good stuff. And he's also the creator and host of The Visual Cast,
Shout
another
out.
fantastic podcast about the world of visuals. If you like this channel, you will enjoy his channel as well. So please go check that out. You can find him online, Rem Visual Art and the Visual Cast, where all visual things are sold. But today he's a guest on my channel. I'm really excited to talk to him today. Thanks for being on the show.
It's an honor to be here, really. I really look up to you. When I started the podcast, you didn't even need to, but you actually reached out to me and were so supportive and so nice. And I feel like you've been somewhat mentoring me and helping me, with the podcast. So I really, really appreciate that. And big fan of you and what you do. And I'm just really excited to be here.
Yeah, man, I really enjoy your show. We'll talk about
Thank
that
you.
a bunch soon. A lot of great episodes, really interesting take on it, really interesting format. But first, I always like to start with the origin story. Please tell us, how did you get into this wild and wacky world
Oh my
of
gosh.
music visuals?
I loved movies from a young age. I was very nerdy and very geeky, and my expression of nerdy geekiness was computers, which then kind of changed and formed into like graphics, which then kind of matured into editing. And I eventually went to film school and studied film. And, growing up in Israel, what everybody does is go to nature parties and go to psytrance parties. So I was kind of ingrained into that scene from a young age. And there wasn't really much visuals in Israel, but by the time I was in my early 20s, I started going to European psytrance festivals, and there are a lot of visuals, a lot of projection mapping. So I kind of was starting to play with like After Effects and effects and editing movies and this kind of multimedia kind of thing, and started seeing visuals and started seeing projection mapping and just got really interested by it. In Modem, I saw Delta Process play. TAS as well, but I honestly didn't really put a name to anybody. I just was like, this is fucking insane. And then the whole festival, I just hung out. Back then, there was like a little dugout for the VJs. They were on the side of the hill. It was like literally you had to walk up like muddy hill to get to them. And I just kind of stood there the whole time, didn't introduce myself, didn't really even talk to anybody, but was just like really amazed. And then when I came back to my film school, I was like, oh, this is kind of like video art. And the film school that I went to was like an art school, so there was a lot of video art happening, but it's like cooler and more interesting, and it ties into kind of the psytrance scene, which I really loved and really wanted to be a part of in a more meaningful way. So that kind of spurred off like the wanting to take it further. I had already been introduced to Resolume. Probably somebody in my school introduced me to it, or maybe just, me being a massive nerd and on the internet all day, but I had already started playing with it, and that kind of like made me think, okay, I got to take this to the next level. I got to start curating clips and loops and start spending money on loops and really take it to the next level. And an amazing VJ, he's been on your show as well, Dorian Mastradamus. He was doing festivals in Israel, but again, like I had never seen visuals in Israel. I had only seen them in Europe. And there was a big festival called Do Festival that was in the Psytrance zeitgeist for many, many years. It was like the only 3-day festival in Israel, or at least one of the biggest ones. And I reached out to him. I said to him, hey, by then I had done like maybe like one or two very underground shows. I just kind of bought a white sheet, just put a projector. I had a lot of connections in the psytrance scene, so I was promoting for lots of clubs and different festivals, and I started videographing for festivals and making like after movies. So I kind of had a little bit of an in. So I just kind of was like, hey, can I bring a projector and put up a white sheet? Borrowed a projector from my school, brought a white sheet, put it up. The first one was so bad, I actually stopped midway because I was just like, this is not exciting. I'm not enjoying myself. The white sheet was just like not behind the DJ because the production didn't want to help me even. They were just like kind of douchebags. And I was just like very almost put off, but I knew what the potential was because I had seen it. So I was like, whatever. They didn't want to help me succeed. And then I did another one that was kind of like in a club on an LED screen that kind of made me feel a little bit more confident. But then again, I reached out to Dorian and he was, he's like, do you know Resolume? I'm like, yeah, of course, I know it. And he's like, okay, well then you can come and shadow me and like help me out. And I was like, at that point, I was like, okay, I don't even need stage time. I just want to be around a master, somebody who does it, see how they do it and learn. That's like, I've always learned from emulating or from learning from seeing, from doing, like very hands-on. I don't really learn well in a classroom environment. So on the drive down, we started talking and he kind of tested me a little bit, like what do I know about layers and about composition and about colors. And because I had been studying film for maybe I think 2 years by now, and I'd already made a bunch of movies and I'd written a lot of scripts and just engrossed myself in film for a very long time. And there used to be this website, the Psychedelic Daily Video. So I would just like very heavily watch that and just got a grasp of maybe naturally, maybe just self-taught, but like of color and composition and what that means, especially when it comes to scene, like scenography or like, an architecture kind of thing. So he was just like very impressed by my knowledge. He let me play with him at the festival, and that was like my first big festival was Do Festival. And because I kind of knew everybody in the scene, people were like really like, wow, like you're playing here, like that's amazing. And it kind of helped me like kickstart my career really fast and just get a lot of gigs very fast. And me and Dorian became like instant friends. And, he basically started mentoring me. So, if that was just giving me lots of loops or answering any questions I had, and even helped me like in the business aspect of like, you should charge this much, you should, talk to them this way. And then we just started sharing things. So he had a gig that he needed help on. I had a gig that I definitely needed help on. Any gig at that point I needed help on. And we just kind of started sharing this. And I didn't really learn any VJing. I really just taught myself everything. But Dorian really like held my hand throughout the whole time. And especially when it came to like how to do slice mapping, so not like 3D projection mapping, but just like the normal Resolume kind of mapping. I really learned his style and his technique just by being next to him and being around him. Now, he wasn't even trying to teach me per se. I just kind of picked it up. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I got into it. Since then, obviously, a lot has changed. I've been lucky, like throughout my time as an artist, to just kind of find people that are either willing or interested in teaching me and teaching me in the way that I need, which is just like, don't teach me anything. Just do what you're doing and let me sit in back of you like a creepy guy and just like watch you and, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, when it came to evolving, I'd say, well, I guess the first step evolving out of like loops, I started making my own content. So it was primarily After Effects. I didn't really understand 3D yet. So I started doing my own After Effects stuff. And that was like really my knowledge of editing and motion graphics and film in general really helped me there. Most of my loops and stuff was like taking stuff that I had filmed in the nature or just like of different things that I filmed throughout my years and like chopping things up and then adding like lots of effects or tiling it. And it kind of like piqued my interest. Like at the same time I was studying film, which film is obviously visual, but there's a lot more of like a storytelling and like character based involvement. And visuals always seem to me like this is not that. Like visuals is like it's ephemeral, it's momentary, it's architectural based if it's projection mapping, or it's like how do I trip the people out as much as possible if it's like just an LED screen. I never really made the connection of like this is a platform for storytelling until
Mm.
I shifted into 3D and real-time graphics. And then I realized that like, okay, there's actually like a really big opportunity to tell stories here. And then I kind of put film on the side completely and just started focusing a lot more on like 3D animation. And then I got obsessed with real-time graphics.
A lot of amazing things in there, a lot of different avenues that we could go down. One thing that I think might be interesting is following a a pathway of mentors. You said that
Mm,
you really enjoy finding somebody that you can sort of sit behind and observe and absorb. So who, if we move down the timeline, who can you think of next that maybe
for
that
sure.
stands out as like your next milestone mentor along the path?
Definitely. I'd like to thank God and Jesus. So after Dorian, like, and really Dorian is still my mentor to today. You know, I really consider him like somebody who I look up to and a really close friend and somebody who really helped me. But he does not do any of that kind of stuff. So I always felt very supported by him. So yeah, after I started getting more into making my own things and wanting to get into real time, I never really understood what real time meant because from my perspective, I was using Resolume, making loops, and every show was different. There was never the same show for me. It was the different style of loops, especially with slice mapping. Whatever you choose to output on a slice is going to create a whole new thing. And I got really deep into the effects, and I just got really into like stacking. And that for me was like what was fun about it was like experimenting and playing. And I never
Hmm.
really understood like what generative was up until I started playing with 3D softwares and saw like a noise texture and like what that means and what it can do. And that kind of spurred my interest. And I went to this festival in Rome called LPM, Light Performers Meeting. And I did a Unity workshop, funnily enough. I did a Unity 3D workshop. And it was bad. It was a bad workshop. I don't remember who did it, so I can say that. But why was it bad? It was because it was like very C sharp oriented. And, you know, most people that are coming to these kind of places are not interested in learning to code. And problem solving part of my brain wasn't mature enough to like be like, oh, this is another problem to solve. I was more like, I don't need this. This is like whatever. And I remember like when I was at the actual festival, when I went to my Airbnb at night, I like went online like Unity visuals, and I found Kajero, who, you know, is very well known and just got like really engrossed into his patches. And he released like a whole bunch of patches and you didn't need to know C sharp and you could make like all this cool audio reactive, super cool stuff. So I kind of was again like a little bit enthralled by it. And then one day at the festival, I saw these two people, a guy and a girl, and they were just like looking over a computer. And like the festival's set up in a way that you kind of like have workshops and they have performances and they have talks and like open discussions. Then at night they have like VJ audiovisual shows. So during the day, if you're not going to a workshop, you can kind of just like set up your computer at a table and there's a bunch of nerds there and you can just like interact and, you know, giggle and whatever with each other. And it's very fun. And I saw these two guys and they just looked so like intensely involved in what they were doing, like really, really deep into what they were doing. And I just kind of like peeked and saw what they were doing. And it was like all these nodes. I didn't even know what a node was, but it was all these little things connected and it just looked so cool. And I just went up to them and I'm like, hey, what is this? You know, and they're like, oh, it's Touch Designer, you know. And then we kind of, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna like, if you don't mind, I'm just gonna like, like stand here creepily behind you and watch what you're doing. And they were totally cool. And then it turned out that they go to festivals as well, and they play at a big festival called Azora Festival, and it was a duo called Oralai from Romania, Alina Anca and Dani Bega. And without even knowing it, they like totally like convinced me that like this is the way of real time and you know all that C sharp shit like can go out the window. And it was just like a really beautiful moment for me. And there was a projection mapping contest at the festival. I was also doing it, but I just did it for the fun. I'm not a very competitive person, but they got second place. And, you know, so like the whole time that I was at the festival, instead of going to the workshop that I paid for, I just kind of like shadowed them and hung out with them and asked a lot of questions and found other people using Touch Designer at the conference. And then that summer, like maybe half a year later, I begged them to come to Romania. And by that point, I had started a career as a VJ. So I was very well known in Israel. You know, I was playing maybe like 2 to 3 gigs a month in Israel. So I had like a big portfolio. I was getting really good at it. And I kind of said to them, hey, there's these two festivals that I know that you guys play out in Europe, Waha and Dakini. Can you get me a gig there? And that will pay for my flight to come to Romania and I'll stay with you guys for a month. inviting myself completely, like, and they're just like very sweet Romanian people. They didn't say no. And it was amazing. I stayed at Alina's house for like a month and kind of like every morning went with her to her work with Danny and just like pissed off Danny all day with questions. And he's like the nicest, sweetest guy. So he was just like, he just took it and it was like really nice. And, I'm joking because really, in retrospect, the experience was actually good for him as well. Like he really loved teaching. Like he didn't even know that he liked teaching and he didn't really realize that that was something that he enjoyed. And while I was there, they did a bunch of galleries that were like these massive projection mapping galleries. So I got to like get more understanding of how do you use a generative real-time software in a projection mapping environment. And then that summer, I played those two festivals in Romania. I did another techno party in Romania. And then I got an opportunity to play at the Modem Festival that I was enthralled with and kind of like, what was my reason for getting into VJing. And I tried using Touch Designer. So like my girlfriend, now wife, like came to meet me in Romania. And at Waha, I started experimenting with what I can do with Touch Designer and not getting very far. And then we had like 10 days to drive from Romania to Croatia. And the whole 10 days I was on my computer. My wife was like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I'm just trying to figure out how to use Touch Designer for Modem because I wanted to come and be like special and like be unique in what I was doing and not just play loops, And Tass, who runs the Hive stage, provides like a 3D model and like all the things that you need to make the stage. And I had never had that experience because up until that, all the stages and stuff are just like, you come, take a picture, or just come and do slice mapping. So I really wanted to take that opportunity. And like in retrospect, it didn't really work out too. I mean, it must have worked out well because I was invited back year after year, but my project just ran at like 15 FPS. And it was like another slap in the face of like real time sucks and I can't do this. But as all things in my path, it's usually user error. And I learned the ways of optimization and how to do things better. So Danny Bega, Alina Anka, I love you guys. They were definitely a huge inspiration for me and like really helped me move forward with my career as a real-time VJ. There's another small anecdote that I would say, like in the past 5 years since moving to America, I started learning Unreal before that, but I got really, really deep into virtual production. And I wouldn't consider him a mentor, but I would consider him somebody who I learned a shit ton from. And his name is Diego Castro, and he works at Excite Labs. He's the funniest guy ever. I love him very much. But he's the type of guy that like he like will answer your question at 3 o'clock in the morning. He'll like take your call while he's in the middle of a shoot and be like, I can't talk right now. I'll call you back in a second. Like he's this the type of guy that just wants to help you and wants to see you succeed. And I love those type of people because, they really speak to me because it's like I can spend the time formulating a question or figuring out what I want to ask them because I know that I'm going to get a really good response from them. So he was a really big influence on me on going from being an Unreal user for like animation, like simple animation, lighting, and like kind of like what I was using it for to like understanding how to like make blueprints and logic and utilize it as like a real-time virtual production engine at a very, very high level.
Awesome. Hell yeah. I think that sort of transitions us, if I'm following the timeline correctly. Post real time, you're not necessarily post real time. I think real time is all the time for you, but
Yeah.
virtual production, this word sort of started coming up a lot and becoming a big part of people's lives. How did you stumble into that world and what was that time like?
It's funny because I was a film student, a film buff, like really into movies, made all these movies, and then kind of like put it aside for doing visuals, being a VJ, and then picked it up again when I realized I could tell stories through 3D animation. But there was still a gap in these two things until I found virtual production. And basically, I had started using a really amazing, awesome program called Notch, which I love very much. It's my favorite program. I'm being sarcastic if anybody didn't realize, but I used Notch for a long time. Notch is cool because in like 2019 or 2018, it was being used in corporate theater and for big, big corporate jobs. because of the real-time nature of it and the iteration. People were like in love with it, and because it was very similar to Cinema 4D, which was kind of like the go-to tool for motion graphics. So I had all these clients in America that were, doing corporate theater and using Notch. And then when COVID hit, all their clients shifted from live events to virtual production. And they hit me up to do virtual production. And for me, it was like, okay, you want me to make a scene that runs 30 FPS? Okay, that's what I was doing anyways. Like I didn't really put much weight into it until I really realized what it was, until I started seeing, okay, oh, there's camera tracking. Oh, there's gen lock. Oh, there's a big LED volume. And there was like a big period of like, I was just getting all these requests for virtual production without knowing what it was. Because it was just like very vague of like, oh, we need this environment. Oh, we need this lower third graphic to be bigger and in the back of a person on a screen. And I was just kind of like, okay, yeah, give me the work. I don't care what it is. And then I got married and somebody offered me a job like right after my wedding. And it was in America, it was in California to do a virtual production to basically be on site while we were making the graphics. And it was for Twitch, for a company called Toy Robot Media. Shout out Mike and Rob. I love them very much, still work with them a lot. And they were hired by a company called Silent Partner, JT Rooney, who I think you've had on the show as well. And it was crazy because all of a sudden I'm in America, which I've been to America before, but you know, not to like Hollywood. I've been to LA a bunch of times, but I was never like in like a big studio. It was just like really trippy. And it's COVID, so you're all with the masks and all the bullshit and everything. And all of a sudden I'm like on a team of like two other designers and we're designing on like, 7 RX nodes, like Disguise RX nodes, and like it's being like a 48-hour live broadcast stream for Twitch, and we're like crunching to like put two scenes to run at 60 FPS in the same level, like in the same like notch layer, because they want to be able to do camera switching between the two sets and not have a split second of like switching the I'm like, you can just switch the level out, and they're like, no, but that's gonna make a second delay. They're like, ugh, okay, whatever. So we had to design it like that. And it was like a crash course of optimization and, how annoying Notch was to work with in virtual production. And that was kind of my foray into it. And then I used a massive amount of money that I made to go on a honeymoon with my wife in Mexico. And then while I was in Mexico, we kind of made a deal together with my wife of like, if somebody offers me another gig, let's just stay in America. Like, because I have a passport, I'm American, so I could just stay in America. And she was like, yeah, of course. She was enthralled by that. And I didn't get a call the whole time when I was on my honeymoon. And I kind of like was like, okay, whatever, let's go back to Israel. It's all good. We have our life there. And then as we're driving from the airport from Mexico to our friend's house, we were actually staying at Mike's house. This guy who I had met a year before that in LA, and we became like Notch friends because he's a Notch user. He's like, hey, I just opened up a studio. I need an operator for a show that was like 3 days a week for the next like 3 months. And it was a show for Facebook. They were doing this live thing. So it was like, I have a 3 month gig. So we decided to stay in America. And then after that show, then he hired me to rebuild the studio. The studio was already built. It was very rudimentary, didn't have Unreal or anything like that, but it was rudimentarily built in Touch Designer. So I was like very excited by that because I can kind of like utilize my skills in Touch Designer and Notch. And yeah, so that was kind of just like a very like easy foray into virtual production. And since then, it's just been a trend. Like, this is already 4 years ago. The trend in Hollywood is virtual production, whether it's for Final Pixel or whether it's for previs and, shooting in volumes. And it has been for the past 20 years. It's just that the technology of LED volumes has gone down. When COVID came about, Final Pixel was more important because they couldn't go to locations. So as far back as Gollum in Lord of the Rings is considered virtual production because they didn't just do motion capture for Gollum. They had monitors with previs 3D. So that was considered virtual production because they're now getting another layer of their in-camera production. And that went to like Avatar, where in Avatar they shot the whole movie obviously in 3D. And they shot that all in virtual production, not in a volume, not in a green screen, but just like they had the motion capture suits producing like not final pixel, but very close to final pixel results. And then, Gravity, that awesome movie, was shot in a volume. That was one of the first ones to be shot in an actual volume, no camera tracking, but just a volume. And if you think about like old movies, rear projection has been a thing since maybe the 70s. So that was kind of the step up of that, of like using an LED volume for a film. And then Mandalorian is like what everybody knows from virtual production. And I would say that that's probably like the most potently used virtual production because it was not final pixel. They still had to rotoscope and use different graphics, but the amount that it was used and the kind of the level that it was used at was very high. So yeah, I mean it's been awesome. I've really enjoyed it. It's kind of allowed me to marry my two loves of like film and graphics and generative stuff, and allowed me to mature because it's such a highly technical thing. I've had to become more of a tech artist. So, besides for designing environments and scenes and whatever is needed in virtual production, I also get to build systems, get deep into the technology of how it works. I'm leading myself into Magic Box, where really what I was hired to do was build like a custom solution to the trucks that we have. And it's all built in Touch Designer. And I've just kind of fallen in love with the aspect of problem solving that is making a system. The node-based graphical interfaces like Notch and Touch Designer and blueprints in Unreal, your final result can be graphics, but you're actually coding. You're actually doing programmatic operations. And I love to make like beautiful visuals and I love VJing and projection mapping because there's something very special about it and especially performing. But really what I love is problem solving. That's like kind of my undertone. And I feel like there's a really big art for me as a creative person to solve these problems. So the more technical I get and the more enthralled I get with like building systems and designing interfaces and solving custom solutions, the more I fall in love with coding and Python and getting deeper into this aspect of programming. And I should say, the more I get better at that, the more my visuals become better. Because now when I have an idea, I can make it way faster than I did before because I have a better understanding of like the mechanisms and the way that these systems work. So I've been very fortunate and lucky that like my career and the work that I do that supports me and my family has also helped me to maintain this level of the thing that I really enjoy, which is visuals and VJing.
Yeah, definitely. It's like getting paid to sharpen the axe a little bit and then go out and have fun and come back and forth, go get inspired and tripped out and come back and get into the tech side of it. Yeah, the virtual production days were wild. I sort of got out of there as soon as I possibly could, but it did keep me alive and with a roof over my head for quite some time. I think the first time we crossed paths in real life,
Yeah,
probably very briefly, was at that Twitch Rivals thing. I was on another project, but
I
I'd been
remember.
working at XR Studios for a little while. So we, probably walked around with masks on and ate food at opposite ends of
The
a 12
best,
foot table for some reason and
even
like
till
all this
this
stuff.
day, even till this day, they had the best food. Like the
They
trucks that they got for that shoot were so
they
good. I
did
was
do yeah, catering was great. I
amazing.
loved when we had a shoot happening there because otherwise I ate Burger King every day because it was very
In the middle of, what was
inexpensive.
it, like Van Nuys, like some
Yeah, it's
middle
literally
of
the only
nowhere
thing
place.
like within walking distance
I
of
remember
that.
that you were working with Spencer Sterling is a good friend of mine, and I knew him before I came to LA, and he kind of was working in XRS as well. And you guys were like working on some Unreal thing actually. I think some DMX Unreal thing, like something on in the side stage. And I remember like going in there and being like so impressed by like what you guys were doing and like almost jealous because I was like tasked with this like ridiculous, almost impossible thing. And like if I don't do it, I'm like fired and never gonna work here again. And you guys are just like playing and fucking around with Unreal and like
Yeah,
experimenting.
I mean that was sort of the vibe over there all the time. It was like every project was something that nobody had ever done before.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, let's do real time XR live stream, Notch and Unreal. no changeovers, no nothing, just straight
Nothing.
to the fucking audience.
Yeah.
It's like, every show we did would like crash every time in rehearsals and like somehow miraculously run like during the shoot.
Oh
Yeah,
my God, it was so crazy.
as soon as we do one thing, they're like, what if we did it with two cameras? So you're like,
Right.
fuck, can we
Yeah.
just like enjoy figuring something out for one day? Nope, keep going. But it was fun. I mean, I learned a shit ton being there, but yeah, I also just like for my blood pressure needed to get the fuck out and go to a live show again. But yeah, great times. I do want to talk about, we've been talking about Touch Designer, Notch, Unreal. You have some feelings, you have some thoughts. If you can give us a little bit of like maybe an overview of what those things are, what they're good at, and you can color it with your true thoughts and feelings about each of them if you'd like, just to give people a sense of like what do you love or hate about any of those three.
Well, so I'll say two things. First is these are all my opinions. I'm just a person. You don't have to listen to anything I say. Find the thing that makes you feel good.
And
That I'll
these
start off with
opinions
that.
can easily change with a few sponsorship dollars. Please,
Yes, I've
our
tried.
emails are open. No.
And the second thing is like hate is a very strong word because these are softwares and you know I do get very intense about these things, but I always remind myself that there are people that work very, very, very hard on making these softwares. So
Definitely
my
doesn't.
opinions should not reflect on the hard work that these people do. And if I say I hate Notch, it doesn't mean that I hate what Notch does or the people that make it. It's just my feelings towards a piece of code, not about how the piece of code is written and how hard people work with that software. So I just want to preface it with that. That being said, no, okay. Notch is amazing because Touch Designer was my first love. But then I had this experience at Modem, and this might get a little bit technical, but I tried taking a 3D model and putting it into Touch Designer as SOPs and then doing all these things on it. And if anybody knows, has used Touch before, SOPs are surface operators that are the 3D kind of stuff in Touch Designer, but they work on the CPU. They were developed way before GPUs became powerful. And I should say that Touch Designer is coming out with a new node family called POPs that are all on the GPU. So that's kind of gone. And later on, I found out that the beauty of Touch Designer is that you can kind of actually do anything with textures. So you can actually do anything 3D with a 2D texture and then convert it to 3D. Convert's not the right word, but that's kind of the point. So I was already kind of playing with 3D in Blender and getting really deep into it. And when I saw Touch Designer, I'm like, oh, great. Finally, I can do real-time 3D. And the first thing that I wanted to do was volumetric lighting. And I remember tapping Danny on the shoulder one day and being like, dude, I'm trying. I don't know how to do this thing. I'm trying to figure it out. How do I do volumetric lighting? And he's like, volumetric lighting? Like, why would you even want to do that? That's not what it's for. And he got really upset at me. And then I was like, okay, fine. Fuck, I guess I can't do the thing that I really wanted to do. So I kind of put it aside. And at the same time, I'm getting really deep into Blender and shading and getting really deep into PBR and all these kind of things. And Touch Designer just doesn't do that. And then when I had this experience in Modem where the mapping that I built with the 3D model was so unperformant, I was just kind of like not turned off by Touch Designer, but I was a little bit like, okay, maybe this isn't the be all that I was thinking of. A pop-up on Facebook, an advertisement. It was literally like my fucking phone was listening to me as it always is. And like all of a sudden I get a pop-up on my thing of like, do you want to do 3D in real time? I'm like, yes, I do want to do 3D in real time. That's exactly what I want to do. And I click on it and I opened up their website and like started going through it. I remember seeing volumetric lighting as one of the things. And I'm like, oh fuck, signed up, spent the $100, got the learning license and just like spent a week of no sleep and just was like enthralled by the rendering and particles and procedurals. And then to Notch's positive word, they tried. I don't think that it works very well, but there is a nice thing in Notch that you can kind of convert, kind of like Touch Designer, where you can take like particles and make them procedurals, or take procedurals and make them fields. So there's kind of this element of like, you design one thing and then you can make it into a lot of different types of looks. And that's really powerful, especially when you're doing real time and motion graphics. So right away, within like 4 days, I upgraded my license to, the paid license, and then just kind of like shot forward with it. And what I loved about it was the speed. So how fast you could make lots of different things. The exploration aspect, which is kind of like what I love about all these softwares, is just like the more you play with it, the more you find cool things. And then the live performance aspect of it. So the thing about Notch is that, and this is something that Notch will tell you themselves, and this is kind of like maybe where I'll talk about what I don't like about Notch, is that it's not a builder, which is like the interface and the environment that you build things with, is not meant for live performance. It's not built for it. It's not optimized for it. It crashes. And I was using it like that. I was kind of like using it like Touch Designer, where you have a node graph and you can start playing with nodes in real time. Because that was fun for me. It's like if I'm at a show, especially Psytrance, you're playing for 12 hours, you're VJing for 12 hours. If I don't have something to do to give myself enjoyment while I'm doing it, I'm going to go crazy. So yeah, you can make things auto reactive. Yeah, you can make them generative, but I want to fuck around with those nodes. So when I was using Notch, I was using it in Builder and just like spouting out a Builder into either Touch Designer or just into Resolume. And there's a lot of frustration there, especially every time you add a node, it locks up for a second and freezes while you add the node. But because I was in Psytrance, it was kind of like cool and experimental, so it didn't really matter. But then I realized, okay, I have to become a big boy and like really use the software the way it's meant to be used. And I started using it in Touch Designer as blocks. And that's kind of where like my next level came in of like, okay, now I really have to like program the scene in a way that I'm going to be able to A, have fun when I'm VJing, B, not expose too many things because then I'm going to get lost in it, and C, optimize because I can't delete a node if I make a block. So in Notch, you can export a block, which is kind of like a locked small little program that you can play and run in a media server like Touch Designer or Disguise or any other media server. And now even in Resolume, even though it's still in beta, but it's super exciting that that's happening. Yes, I'm excited about it, even though I don't use Resolume. So yeah, I just kind of shifted into, being a little bit locked out from the node graph and kind of like realizing that there's more to the experimentation. And also because I was using it in Touch Designer, I still had the opportunity to experiment and play with things, whether it was like textures that I was inputting into the block or logic of like the operation of the channels that was controlling the parameters in Notch. But I also kind of got a little bit bored with Notch because of this experience, because it's like, okay, I can't use it on a professional level with Builder, so I can't experiment in the moment. And I've kind of like done all the things that you can do in Notch. And because I can't experiment and explore in the moment, then I'm kind of a little bit bored with it. So I got my techniques, I have my looks, I have my scenes. And then Unreal came along. Well, Unreal has been around for a long, long time, but I started getting into Unreal. I think it was one of those natural things of like, oh, Unreal is a real-time 3D engine. And before COVID, Unreal was being used in virtual production for sure, but there was a large aspect of people using it for high-end concerts, not projection mapping, but like high-end visuals in concerts. There was this really cool Childish Gambino thing that he did with NDisplay. It was like one of the first rudimentary uses of NDisplay, and NDisplay is like a system in Unreal that allows you to basically render very, very, very high resolutions over a cluster of render nodes. So you can render a piece of it on one machine and a piece on another and a piece on another, a piece on another, and it keeps it all in sync and allows you to render very high. So they did a projection mapped dome, which was like some crazy like 16 by 8K resolution with Unreal. And I think I had seen that or I'd read about it or I don't remember what, but I'm like, okay, Unreal's free. I'm going to pick it up. And honestly, like the moment I opened it, I was like in love. And this is kind of like why I picked up Notch, was so that I can render in 3D. But Notch has all these limitations. It doesn't look as nice as like a render from Cycles, from Blender, or from, Octane or whatever. And if you want it to look as nice as, especially back then, there was no ray tracing. That came later. But even with the ray tracing, it's not optimal. You can't really perform. So Unreal, out of the box, you add a light, you add an object, all of a sudden you have beautiful shadows, beautiful lighting. It's cinematic. There's a huge learning curve, I think, because if you want to do anything besides adding a light and adding an object, you have to like learn the shading, the materials, you have to learn the sequencer, which is kind of similar to a lot of other systems, but it's not as straightforward. And then the extra layer of like learning how to use Unreal as a live tool, you have to understand blueprinting. And that's like a whole can of worms. Now, again, I'm very lucky because my first love was Touch Designer. And Touch Designer as a node-based system is bare bones. So Notch gives you a lot of built things. So, like you don't have to build a particle system in Notch, you just have to add two nodes. In Notch, you don't have to build a cloner system or iteration system. It's just a node. In Touch Designer, if you want to do clones or iterations, you have to build it per se. You don't building the code for it, but you have to have something to iterate. So like a 3D geometry, and then you have to give it what are you iterating on. So if are you iterating on a 3D model, are you iterating on a texture, are you iterating on whatever, anything you want on channels. So you have to learn the logic of what these things are because all these things are doing the same thing. Cloner is just a brand name that Cinema 4D came up with, but it's really just iterations. So at the same time, you have to learn these things. And with Touch Designer, even more so when it comes to like techniques or texturing, you have to learn like add and subtract and different blending modes, what they do. And you have to understand math. Now, I suck at math. I'm an idiot. I'm really dumb. But when you start learning techniques and things, I started realizing that like, oh, this is not scary math. Like this is just functions. And like my brain is like, if I learn a function, I'm going to understand it and have it now in the future. My memory is not so great, so I'll have to kind of like find the function, but I'll know which function to look for. So I'm one step ahead at least. So because I learned Touch Designer, and I always tell people that are kind of like trying to get into this world, like, what are your goals? Okay, your goals are to make real-time generative stuff. Go to Touch Designer. Are your goals to learn 3D? Okay, maybe it's worth for you to start in Unreal. But just know that you're going to have a very hard learning curve with blueprints. If you start in Touch Designer, you're going to have a very big understanding of node-based programming. So to pick up Notch, to pick up Tool, to pick up Unreal, to pick up even like geometry nodes and Blender shading materials, you're going to understand the logic of nodes. And another thing about Notch, the node logic is not like any other program. In Notch, you have a center node that you attach all your nodes to. No other node language works like that because it's counterintuitive to how scripts work and how nodes should work. It works well for Notch because of what it is, but you're not going to understand the conceptualization of nodes across other systems. So I love Unreal very much. I think it's an amazing tool. There's so much resources to learn it. It's free. I think that the beauty of Unreal is that you don't have to learn lighting and materials if you just want to learn programming. You don't have to learn programming if what you want to do is lighting and materials because of the amount of resources that are out there and because of the massive, vast marketplace that exists that you can download and buy things. So if you don't want to learn how to make an OSC thing, you can download a plugin that does it. You don't want to learn how to make materials, you can download a library of materials. So I always say, like, if you want to learn programming because that's like something that you want to get into, pick up Touch Designer. You want to learn generative graphics, pick up Touch Designer. You want something fast and easy and simple and expensive, pick up Notch.
Keyword expensive
Yeah.
for sure. But yes, it
Um,
is all those other things as well.
you asked me to showcase something here on your podcast, so I had to jump back into Notch because I really haven't. Is this a good time to talk about that?
Yeah, let's hop over into that because, yes, as we know, you have an amazing podcast. And one of my favorite things about it is the segment that you do in the middle of the show. And we're going to do it a little more towards the end of our show. But it's awesome where you take it's called the set, and you have your guests show you something. They do a demo of some kind, their workflow, something they've made, and really fascinating. So I wanted to try that with you and have you show us a little bit of some of your workflow for Modem, I believe.
Yeah.
And yeah, funnily enough, made with Notch.
So this is kind of funny because I haven't touched this for like a year, and really this year has been my no notch year. I don't have a license, and I stopped using it. if a client asks me to use Notch, I'm not going to say no. I'm not crazy. I just haven't had any requests for it. So I haven't really needed it. But opening up my old project file and seeing all this Notch stuff, I've kind of like remembered why it's so fun because of how fast it is. But at the same time, remembered how fucking annoying it is. All these little things that now are just like out of my mind with Unreal or with Touch Designer that I don't have to worry about, that all of a sudden I've had to deal with again in Notch. But yeah, first of all, I'm suing you for copyright infringement for using my set in your thing.
Yeah, this segment is actually called Secret Sauce with Sean. It's not the set. It has nothing to do with the set. I've never even heard about the set.
Unfortunately, because I don't have my Notch license, I only have a learning license. And because it's old, I have new versions and everything. So I can't show the exact flow of it, but I would love to show kind of how I approach projection mapping in general. Because subsequently, since I stopped using Notch, I've transferred all my techniques into Unreal. And this is something, again, that I want to iterate to inspire artists. It's not necessarily about what you make, it's really how you make it and what you're learning along the way of making it. And that's kind of why I love generative in real time, because when you make something, you can now use that thing forever. It's not a render, especially in projection mapping. When you render something for projection mapping, you're never going to use it again. It's very depressing. So the next level of that is make things that are techniques that you use. So if I know that I'm going to use a stepper in every show, make a stepper. If I know that I'm going to do pieces flying all over the place, which is what I do, then make a system that is going to do that. And the beauty of that is that if I go from Notch to Unreal, yes, I'm going to have to learn how to do the technique in Unreal, but I don't have to figure out something new. I already kind of know it. And because all these systems are the same, they're all built around 3D or in Touch Designer like textures and points. It's all points. Then you can kind of start from somewhere and kind of have a head start. So yeah, I just want to say that. And to just go back a little bit about Notch and Unreal and all that stuff, I do make a lot of noise about Notch sucking. I really don't want that to result in people not picking it up. It's not my goal. The shit talking and stuff is really, out of a joke, but more it's just like I try to be an authentic person and try to like say what I feel. And it's not to say like don't be inspired by something or don't go and explore something. Never. I never want that to be the result of me shitting on Notch. If anything, the shitting on it should want to make you be more interested in it because you want to see how right or wrong I am to you. So I just want to say that.
Yeah, and they
Now
were
that
all very valid positive and negative points about Notch and Touch Designer.
I didn't
Run
say anything
into
negative about Touch Designer, and I never would.
Yeah, I mean, your beginning experience with Touch Designer
I'm
is a
joking.
lot like mine, where I get in there and try to do something, and I'm like, yeah, this is not what everybody says it is. Get me out of here. And then I go to my safe little Lego kit and Notch, and everything plugs into each other as long as you can figure out if it's
And
supposed
what
to
plugs
go in
into
the
yeah,
in the ass
exactly.
or the head or what piece I'm missing. Once you get that, then you're like, okay. And it's pretty and easy, and I didn't have to know anything. But yeah, you can run into a wall for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't make sense like other things. It's sort of like Blender. But anyway, I
I love
I
that.
digress.
That's so let me share my screen. Yeah.
Yes, Touch Designer.
Okay. So the way that everything starts off, it starts off from an image. So the amazing and powerful and best VJ ever, Tass, made this image out of the best, amazing stage designer, Bjorn, who I just had on my podcast. You should definitely check that out. Stage is his design of the stage. And let me actually just pull up a video of Modem just quickly, just so we can kind of get a reference to what it looks like during the day and during the night, because I think it's very important to see. This is the stage during the day. And as you can see, it's like these intricate wood cut pieces. It's very big and it's flat, but there's actually a lot of depth to it. These kind of have this depth to it. These have this depth to it. A lot of layers is really what the pieces kind of do. And then in terms of, let me just show, this is kind of what it looks like at night. Um, this is actually Unreal, which I'm going to show as well. But you can kind of see like that I'm using, in this case, like you can kind of see the outline of the stage here, but what I've kind of transitioned to in my projection mapping is this kind of idea of elements that are separate from the stage that interact with the stage. So in this case, I have these Merkabahs that are kind of flying around with these particle simulation, and they're kind of in this first version, I didn't have so much interaction, but they're hiding the pieces. If you can see, they're kind of as they fly around, they're hiding and revealing the pieces of the stage. Um, and then maybe here you can see it better. And then in terms of like the notch stuff, so in terms of the notch stuff, it's a lot more classical projection mapping where you have, the image of the stage with different effects and kind of like the pieces are interacting in a certain way. So that's kind of like the first approach. So like I said, I get the image from TAS. Now TAS, because he's an amazing, all-powerful being, also provides a 3D model in Cinema 4D, unfortunately. But I, bring it into Blender. I'm not going to do that right now, but I clean it up and then I bring it into Notch. So when I bring it into Notch, I bring it in as, an FBX, as a stage, and I do a bunch of stuff to it. Now, the only thing is that's annoying is because I can't use a block, I have to NDI this into Touch Designer, so it's a little bit clunky. Maybe I'll just show it like this with the thing here. And another thing that's annoying is because I basically expose all the parameters that I want to use, and then I'm supposed to use them as a block in Touch Designer, but I can't because I don't have a license. So if I actually turn it on, it's going to crash. So this might be a little bit clunky, but I'm going to try and do it anyways. So I have the 3D model, right, in Notch now. So the first thing that I like to do is have like a few different types of lightings, right? I have this lighting that's kind of more of a base lighting and more of a non-base lighting. Go away, watermark. And I even have my favorite, which is this rainbow.
Oh
I have a
yeah.
speed for the control, how fast the lights are turning around. I also try to make everything generative. So it's not just turning around in a circle. There's actually some like noise patterns here in the circles of the lights. Maybe we can actually just look at them as they're turning around. So you can kind of see like they're never kind of turning around the same. They're always kind of like in a new configuration that kind of makes it more interesting for me.
Yeah.
This watermark is so amazing. And then I have this environment map that is a little bit more like this is like a little bit more classic projection mapping where things are kind of blinking on and off.
Yeah. Getting
Um,
reflections off all the different panels and everything.
exactly. So that's the first step, right? Is lighting. And then the second step is different textures, different materials. And I usually have it set so that I can just like control the emissive, the roughness metallic outside of the block because again, I'm scared that I'll be stuck. But I usually have like a few different selections of things. These are all designed in Substance Painter. Now, when the emissive is on, then this actually really gets powerful. And this is like a little thing that I really loved about Notch. This is like a fake global illumination where you have an emissive texture and the voxel cone can kind of start being lit up by the emissiveness. Now, it's not so impressive with this texture, but where it really gets impressive is when this is really revealing like a secret sauce, but I'm more than happy to reveal it. But what I do is in the model, okay, and this is going to be hard to show in Notch, but in the model, I have two sets of UVs. Okay. I have one set of UV that is, and for anybody that doesn't know, UVs are kind of like the two-dimensional map of the 3D object. So this is a 3D object, but it has a two-dimensional map that knows where each piece of texture sits on the model. So I have one set that is made for, these kind of substance designer textures, but then I have another one that is just a project from view. And project from view, I'm not going to go too much into it, but basically it just means that now my UVs of this thing is going to look like the pixel map of the stage, which is this, right? It's going to look like this. What does that mean? That means that if I feed into the model anything that is the model itself, which is the 2D representation of the model, it's going to sit within the pieces. And that becomes very, very powerful because now I can make visuals like normal 2D visuals, but they're going to sit in my model and work as if they're a texture. So let me see if I can just show that quickly. I think it's this one. And then I have like a multiplex here. Is it this one? Oh, maybe not. Let's just jam it in here. Fuck it. We're going live. Where is this going into?
Do it live.
Oh, okay. I see. I see. So, okay, I put it on the diffuse material, interestingly enough, not on the emissive. I forgot about that. So in here, I can actually do it where if I turn on diffuse, uh, remove this. So you can see that this is kind of now, and if I change the source to like this, you can kind of see that this image, okay, is being projected, let's say, onto the model. You can basically get
Yeah,
a lot of very strong effects with this technique. And it's a very powerful technique. I really have used it a lot.
yeah, it's pretty awesome though. It opens up a whole other like set of layering that you can do, and
Exactly.
you're like
Whole,
projection mapping within your projection mapping
exactly,
and
exactly, exactly.
blending
See if this
textures and
works with that.
materials with like two sets of materials. It's kind of wild.
Exactly. And it allows me also to like do collaboration with other artists that have 2D stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so I actually have a bunch of different models in here. I just remembered that are all doing different things. I'll just go through it quickly because this is kind of like not really so interesting because this project is kind of like dead. So I'll just show the pieces one because I guess it's the most interesting. But this one is one of my favorite nodes in Notch called the particle bone deformer. And what it does is it takes each piece is a separate piece, a chunk, and it makes it a particle. So you can now utilize the particle effectors.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Yeah, that's cool. I don't know
so
if I knew about that one.
oh, dude, it's the best one for sure.
It's
So if I
great.
turn this noise off, yeah, and now I have, what does this do? This is something. This is something.
Ooh,
Where is the
that was
actual
sick.
important part? Spring here. So these springs allow you to
Ooh.
make cool shit happen with like spring effects. And again, this is kind of going back to the technique. Like all I'm doing here is using a spring to bring the thing back to it, right? And then using different effectors to create motion animation. When I brought this into Unreal, I did the same thing. I mean, it was very difficult to find out how to make a spring in Unreal, but I knew what I was looking for.
Yeah.
So once I knew what I was looking for, I could build the same thing in Unreal, and have it kind of work the same way that I like.
Hmm.
Um,
And you can
so
use this, in your next show, different stage, toss that geometry into this thing, and it's
exactly.
immediately
I
trippy and
used
cool.
this project I've used on maybe 7 or 8 different stages because of how easy it is to just bring in the model, find the camera, and just do it. So just for that, super powerful. This is a bunch of fun stuff here. Let me get out of this. Okay. So now we have kind of like this really fun, kind of like, you know, classic MoGraph kind of thing going on. Um, and so I could turn that off. Then we can start seeing a few other things that I have here. We saw the particle. This one is also really cool. This does like a spinny effect. Obviously, you can
Shoot.
control like a lot of different kind of stuff with it. Now, again, because it's real time, because it's generative, then this is one look, right? But the moment I just turn the lights off and turn, you know, let's say whatever the rainbow lights on, all of a sudden I have a completely different thing. It's obviously the same motion, but it's a different design. Same thing could go for if I change the material. So this is kind of like what I love real time is just that ability to be so fluid with the changes and things that you're doing. Let's see this one. This is kind of a more classic cloner effect. And then when you add to it the fact that it's real time, okay, and the fact that I have all these things exposed as controls, then I can start performing with it. So it's not just, it's not just an animation doing that. It's actually the fact that I can control the speed on a knob, and I have my trusty MIDI fighter over here. The fact that I control the speed on a knob, this is obviously you're not seeing the power of it because I'm stuck in a Notch Builder and I can't, control it with my MIDI. You can, but I don't have it set up that way because I have it set up for a media server. But then you start getting into like, okay, I can start being auto reactive with the music. I can even like I have a whole audio interface here in Touch Designer that I can use for parameters. And when you bring in a notch block into Touch Designer, you have access to all the parameters that you expose. And this is my effects patch, which is a separate project that I'll just show quickly because it's cool that I can do post process to. So this is kind of the post process of it. And then let me turn. This is my favorite one. This is the kind of the only thing that I miss with Notch is this. This is the one effect that I miss in Notch, but I'm almost figured it out in Touch Designer. So we're almost there. This is called frame difference, but it's kind of like a frame feedback effect. But it's like it's just candy. Like, I mean, for Psytrance, this is the shit. Flashy shit, but not flashy in a way that like is like stroby, but flashy that's like kind of psychedelic. It's like, I love it. I love
Oh
it.
yeah, all the little pieces, all the little colors constantly
Exactly.
changing.
Um, so yeah, I mean, like Notch is really powerful, and I'm happy that I got to show this off kind of in a way, but it's not as powerful as Unreal. It's kind of the point of this showcase to show that in a way. There's some things that yes are fast, and we saw the node graph before. There's not a lot of nodes here. Maybe there's. I think we can see how many nodes there are, right? Just it says it in the bottom corner somewhere.
Yeah, I
Oh,
don't
here,
remember
corner in the
exactly
left
where.
corner, 250 nodes. If you think about, how much content I actually have here, I have enough content for, I'd say easily a 4 or 5 hour show. If I add on top of it all the stuff that I can do with the diffuse textures, then probably infinite amount of show. So for 250 nodes, getting all that in a show, like that's a lot. That's a lot. It's not a lot of nodes to do it. But that being said, I had to design and develop all these things. It took a very long time to kind of come up with these techniques and ideas. So, it's never as simple as, oh, it's not a lot of nodes or, oh, Notch is fast, right? It's never as simple as that. It's always kind of like it's fast and you can do cool things, but, it might have taken you a year or so to learn how to do that thing. So there's always that to think about. So that's one layer where I have my, notch block. And now I've converted that in 2024 in this year in Modem. I have all this running in Unreal, kind of very similar. Looks a lot better, runs a lot smoother, and I think is cooler. But it's kind of the same idea of I have a 3D model and I'm manipulating it with different forces, different effects on the geometry. And I have some lighting. And then I have the second layer, which is Unreal, which is kind of like what I was talking about before, where I'm trying to create my shows that are not just the architecture of the stage, that they're actually utilizing proper characters, I like to call them. In my case, they're just Merkabas. So this is version 1 from last year, and now I have my MIDI controller working so I can actually like control things. So here I have a very similar kind of idea with the lights where you can see just comparing the two, right? Lights shining here. This is the same texture, by the way, same material from the one before. Just the way that the lights look are infinitely better. I'm getting 80 FPS, whereas in Notch, running that scene just with the lights, it was like around, I think, 25 or 35. You just can't compare. Now, I will say this to get what I was showing before in Notch, where I had my lights all hooked up to math modifiers, right? This kind of like noise pattern kind of thing. I don't do that in Unreal. I actually send noises from well, actually, in this version, I actually did build it in Unreal, but I realized that it wasn't doing what I wanted to do. And it was very, it's generative, but it's not the generative that I want. I'm basically, I'm getting a random number and using that random number on a time so that as they're spinning around, they're getting a random value, but it's not true noise. So in my next version, I actually made all the noise in Touch Designer and sent the values into Unreal as positional value. So like in Notch, yeah, one node, right? To make a math modifier that has a noise. In Touch Designer, it's one node. In Unreal, I had to make the whole fucking logic of like generating a random number when the game starts and then taking that random number and putting it in here. Like very annoying, right? So because I have Touch Designer, I can do it in Touch Designer and send it into Unreal, which I only kind of thought of this year. So that's kind of like interesting to see the differences between how the different processes work. Now, okay, so this is kind of just like what it's, just the shadows and lighting. Just this by itself is kind of like beautiful and does a lot of nice work. But what I try to do is like I was saying with these characters. Now, this is kind of like I came up with this last year with this kind of idea of like utilizing these characters, in this case, Merkabahs. And this year I've taken to the next level where I have 5 different scenes that utilize these quote unquote characters and do different things within the scene and within the environment. So I kind of like developed this over time. These are kind of like moving. I use the same kind of idea of the randomized noise where I'm just getting a random number, adding that value to the time of the scene, controlling the speed through a knob, and then, using that to make a Perlin noise. So technically it is one node, I guess, in Unreal, but you have to, you know, make it work for your needs. But again, like I said, like in the new project, which I'm not going to show because I want it to be unveiled, I've done that all in Touch Designer. So this one kind of has like these cool kind of like different things that the Merkabahs can do. They have like different animations that they do. There we go. So they like open up. They can kind of do more fun stuff if I can get these fucking buttons to work. And this is the old way that I did OSC. It's so look how ridiculous. This is just for OSC, but thank God this amazing guy made this awesome plugin that does all this automatically within like one node.
Oh, wow.
OSC toolset. It's called. It's really, really worth the $9. I totally recommend it.
Yeah, shit's cool, man.
Thanks,
I
dude.
like it. Modem has always been like that festival, you know?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I started out in the Psytrance projection mapping world and yeah, that festival and fucking Taz and all those guys that
it's
were like everything.
yeah, it's really a special place, and like it's such an inspiring place to be at. Like just being there is just so you just feel so good. Like just as a general pop, you just feel so inspired just by being there.
Mm.
Um, it's really powerful. Like if you ever have the chance to go, you should just come. We'll put you up. We'll get you on stage for sure.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I need to feel like I need to get back into some Psytrance projection mapping vibes. The big flashy LED, EDM,
It is
consistent.
what it
It's a
is.
consistent paycheck, but yeah, it gets old. It's not as inspiring
No,
as
definitely not.
the shit that got me into this.
So this is my new and improved 2024 project for Modem, and I also use this similar project for Space Safari. It's a lot more fleshed out, a lot cleaner. I think the first thing that I'll show is kind of like the way that I'm doing OSC with this plugin called OSC Toolset. So just the Touch Designer project is a little bit cleaner. I have similar things going on where I'm sending my MIDI into OSC. I also have a Touch OSC project that's running on my iPad. It looks like this. So I have a lot of controls over the texture, over the material. I can switch between different things. I have color control. I have different levels, switching things on and off. I have control over emission, rotation. I can jump between manual control of the transformation or automation between different things. I have that running on the side on an iPad. I also have my MIDI, obviously. And then what I was talking about before, where I kind of have a lot of control in Touch Designer with the rotation, transformation. I have this LFO thing going on, and I'm sending all of that into Unreal via OSC toolset. And then I'm also sending textures into Unreal. So I'm sending an emissive, a roughness, metallic, and a normal map. And those can be anything from, this kind of like procedural reaction diffusion kind of thing to different types of GLSLs that I have here that are kind of like running and doing some cool stuff. And then that again gets sent in as a, roughness, metallic, and normal map. So it's very powerful. I'll show that in a second. That gets sent into Unreal via NDI, and then everything gets sent back into Touch Designer via NDI, and then I go through post-process, which is a little bit of an older project, but I have a bunch more post-process effects in the newer one, or in the one that I was using. And then that gets sent out to a final output. Now, this is all running on one computer. Usually I do not run it on one computer. I have this Touch Designer project running on my laptop, which is my final output, and Unreal is running on my desktop, obviously, so I can get a higher performance. So there might be a little bit of a performance delays, but normally I realized that once splitting up the project from two PCs, there was a much bigger performance boost. There's just an issue when you have two of these powerhouses running. They like to have you looking at one of them. So if I was looking at Unreal, I would get lower Touch Designer performance, and if I was looking at Touch Designer, I would get lower Unreal performance. So splitting them off to two computers made a big difference. Okay, so that's kind of the setup here. And then in Unreal, in terms of OSC, as you see, I don't have any OSC blueprints because now, because of this plugin, basically any of my blueprints can now get OSC messages. And I'll just show it on the Material Logic blueprint. So the OSC toolset is great because it basically gives you the ability to add these little blueprint components. And then once you add them, you can just put in the address here. And then if we go back to Touch Designer, then I could see that in OSC toolset, I have a bunch of chops coming in. So these are like individual chops. And then I also have transformations and color. And then the address is kind of just like simplified. So instead of me having to do // blah, 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 I just have to put in that. And if I put that in to here, then I'll get that information. And then as you see, my node graphs are a lot cleaner. I don't have that crazy event dispatcher. I don't have the OSC thing. I just have these kind of components. It's super optimized because it only gets sent on the tick. I'm very happy with it. And the developer is also updating it and fixing some issues that were apparent. So I won't go into too many of my blueprints because they're just a little bit kind of like specific. And also like they would just take whole videos to just explain them themselves. But I will talk a little bit about a plugin that I'm working on. I don't have a name for it right now, but Forces is kind of the name that I'm giving it. And these are custom built C++ modules that allow you to do physical based effects based on the rigid body dynamics of Unreal. So the Chaos Physics engine, which is a very robust physics engine inside of Unreal, basically allows you to, do collisions. And, this is kind of my collisions, what they look like. It allows you to do fracturing and things of this kind of nature. And in Unreal Native, there's a radial force cloner that is really nice, but all it does is kind of like brings things closer in or brings things further away. And that's fine, but I wanted to have more things. I wanted to have kind of like what I was doing in Notch, where you had the particle-based effectors. You had a vortex, you had a noise. But here, they're actually physical-based, so they're actually working within the quote-unquote physics system of Unreal, and they also have collisions. So the effect is a lot more apparent, and the nice thing about it is that you don't really have to do anything to set it up. All you have to do is make sure that you have physical bodies, which essentially all it is simulate physics. And then you obviously can control, on any mesh, simulate physics, and then you can control if you want to have collisions or not. So that makes it very easy to use. Instead of using something like Niagara where you have to kind of like import and create a bunch of stuff for it, I have it set up like that. This is a plugin that I'm working on actively. I would like to eventually release it maybe in the coming months, maybe in the coming weeks. Let's see. I don't know when this is being released. And essentially here I just have like, different things to turn them on and off. I'm using my MIDI controller to control this. So I have my vortex turning it on and off, radial, repel, turbulence, which is a noise, and some other logic for the Merkaba, which I'll show in a moment. So yeah, I mean, this project is a lot more streamlined. It's a lot cleaner. I'm much more proud of it, and I'll show a little bit of it now. I'm also using the Offworld plugin for all my NDI and Spout. Super awesome plugin. I really can't recommend it more. It's a little bit pricey, but honestly, if you just need simple in and out, it's very reasonable, $100 for the NDI and Spout plugin. The amount of features and tools that they are updating with yearly is phenomenal, and the optimizations are just amazing. So one of the optimizations is that when I press play, I actually am not rendering my viewport. I'm only sending out to NDI. That is a huge performance enhancer, because essentially if I'm sending to NDI, I'm already rendering this render target. But if I'm also rendering the viewport, then I'm essentially rendering twice, and that's just a waste of resources. Yes, I could put my camera like onto the blackness over here, and maybe that would help, but that's just kind of like, not here, not there. So when I press play, I'm going to go back into Touch Designer, and I'm going to be able to view my scene within Touch Designer. Like I said, I do have to unfortunately be focused on Unreal because of the nature of the way that I'm splitting the computers, but we can kind of have Unreal running up here and Touch Designer here, and when I switch between them, there might be a little bit of a performance hindrance, but we'll be okay with it. So as you see, I have control over my lighting. I can turn my different lights on and off. I have my rainbow lights. I can control the speed of them. This is all, again, through Touch Designer, sending out transformational positions to Unreal. I even have these nice little spinny lights this time that kind of spin around. And in terms of the physics stuff that I was talking about, let me just show you what that looks like. So I have this spring. I have basically two modes, where one mode is a little bit more intensive on the processy and one is a little bit less. So one mode is where the pieces intersect with each other and can kind of go inside of each other. Let me just turn on a noise so we can kind of see this in action. This is kind of like a turbulence noise. So you can see the kind of pieces are intersecting with each other. It looks a little bit more like what the notch thing looked like. But then I can also turn on the rigid body between each of the pieces. And now when they're kind of like moving, they're not intersecting with each other. So it kind of feels a little bit more real. I know that real is kind of a weird word to use here, but it feels a little bit more physically based. Let's say it like that. Unfortunately, this is a very heavy process because there's about 1,500 pieces. So it has to make a lot of calculations about rigid bodies. So I have a button for it where I can turn it on and off. But for some effects, it's totally okay. So yeah, this is kind of a noise simulation where I can kind of control the effect of the turbulence. And then I can obviously spring it back into action like we had before in Notch, where things spring back into place. Let's try a different texture here so I can do like a nice animation and go to a different type of texture and kind of get, another complete different look. Let's try a different type of force effector. Let's try a force, like a repel and attract. So let's start again. So start here and kind of have this force effector. Kind of, this is that effect that I loved in Notch. I kind of managed to replicate it inside of Unreal. We can even change the different textures on the fly as it's going, so we get like a new kind of look. I can also slow things down, so I have the control over the master speed of the whole simulation. And this is different than like dampening. I also have a dampening control, but this is different than dampening. I'm actually controlling the speed of the simulation. So the interaction between the different pieces and things are going to remain the same, but I'm actually slowing down the simulation. This is very powerful because I'm not dampening the effect. The effect is still remaining, but I'm actually just slowing down the simulation. And this is actually one node in Unreal. So that's pretty freaking cool that you can do that with one node. I also have a dampening, so I can actually dampen the simulation as well. If I don't, if I don't want to slow it down, I just want to kind of have like things move, maybe like, have the effects kind of stay the same, but have things kind of be a little bit more dampening. You can kind of see that, there's still, the speed is still there, but they're kind of moving in a little bit of a more damp way. I can kind of do that. So I have that kind of force, kind of like the force going outwards or inwards. Obviously, this is going to give me lots of different effects, lots of different stuff to do. As you see here, I turned off that kind of collision. If I turn it back on, we can see that things get crazy when lots of pieces are intersecting together. See, as like 1,000 pieces are touching each other, it has to make 1,000 times 1,000 calculations, so it kind of loses itself. So if I turn that off, the speed kind of goes back to it. I do have some fixes for it in my newer builds, but this was kind of at the beginning of the summer when I was still kind of prototyping everything and really learning how all this stuff was kind of going to work together. And besides that, we also have like kind of this nice little effect where the pieces are kind of getting sucked into like the pivot points, as it were, of the kind of simulation, the sides and the center. And as we see, the dampening really makes an effect there. So let me just slow it down a little bit so we can get like a little bit more, see what's going on here. So pieces are kind of like really dynamically interacting with each other. They're colliding with each other. There's a lot of chaos, going on. That's where like a lot of the spring comes into play to kind of organize the chaos in a nice way. It's also where like the slowing things down is very important. And let's get everything back into place here. And okay, and now we also have my personal favorite is the Vortex. Not everybody loves this one, but this is my favorite, and we can also maybe change the material. So this is kind of another one that we have here. So this is also a custom thing that I built, the Vortex, that essentially creates a nice little vortex animation where the pieces are kind of in the center, spinning around. They're also being attracted to the center, but they're kind of creating this like nice little vortex effect. I can also layer things, so I can, obviously turn on the noise effector while they're being kind of vortexized. So you can see they're kind of moving now inside of the vortex. And then I can also change the orientation of the vortex. So now I have a spinning vortex in the other way. And then when I add the collisions, I think that it looks super nice because you kind of get this like, again, this very like physically based kind of like effect that somehow feels like natural, organic, and I just really love the effect of it. So let's pull these all back into their position. Boom, we're back. I also have a gravity, so I control the gravity of the situation. If I want to have the pieces kind of fall to their, well, they're not dying, I guess, but they're falling to their, falling to their void. Let's take another material here, see what we get. Oh, purple gold, a nice crowd favorite, as it were. And then again, we can kind of play with the lighting, so we can turn on, kind of like a little bit of a rainbow light here, get it a little bit more psychedelic. I can even maybe like mirror the situation. I don't know if that's actually going to work. I don't think I have that actually in this version. Never mind. Forget that I said that. And then another favorite of mine is this. Let me turn off this gravity here. Let me remove these lights. Let's bring back these lights. This one is I think, a really nice effect where there's like these little vortexes moving around these circular lights as they're moving. So let me just get this a little bit bigger here. So as you can see, as the lights are moving around, you kind of get this almost like a displacement trippiness kind of with the lights moving around. This is super, it's subtle. Obviously, I'm going a little bit full with it this moment, but you can kind of get it really subtle where it's like, almost like the pieces are like really small moving around. And then you can obviously make it very big. But I just find this very cool with the lighting and the shadows and the dynamicness of it, where it's super procedural, where I can, like, instead of making the circular lights, I can still have it kind of spinning around in this fashion with just these, different lights. So yeah, it's kind of a little bit of my rig here. Now let's get to the moment we've all been waiting for, which is the Merkabahs. Maybe before that, actually, I'll show one more thing. So I also have this kind of like displacement material. This is actually the beauty of it is because we have lumen, I'm getting this kind of like very subtle global illumination around where the, really vibrant parts are. That's kind of like leaving almost like a feedback effect. It kind of looks like super subtle, but I mean, this is like very powerful because if I change the material, for instance, then we kind of get a little bit of a different effect in the lighting of this. Now, the nice thing about this is that it also works with, it kind of does a pulse, control over the speed. I can make it go outwards. But the cool thing is it also has this kind of like displacement effect, so I can make the stage kind of, I don't know, what would you call this? Like kind of like, helloing, I guess. It's kind of saying hello or goodbye. I guess, now it's saying hello, now it's saying goodbye. And it can also go extreme, obviously, because it's Psytrance, we got to go extreme. And the cool thing about this, because it's material based, it's on the shader, it actually interacts with the physics. So if I turn on the gravity, for instance, and the whole stage starts to fall down, I now have this kind of like multiple, very maybe not so subtle effect happening. But obviously, this is going to be very trippy on a full stage. Okay, so before I go into the Merkabahs, I just want to kind of show this kind of like texture sharing thing. And it's not going to be super impressive because I don't have much content here to show it. I guess I can show the Glass Crane thing, which is pretty cool. So this is some content that Glass Crane made for me. It's just two videos that are kind of like these really nice, actually made in Notch. So shout out to Glass Crane and Notch. They're just really nice rainbow effect. I just have like a simple switcher between them and some masking. And I also have a little bit of an effect that I made for it. So besides for being able to send it this, let's say this reaction diffusion, let's get this kind of like doing something a little bit more interesting. Let's see if I can get some good control over it now. It's always hard to control it live, but I believe in myself. Okay, so if we do this, and now I turn on the special button. Well, actually, before I turn on the special button, we could show it like this, where I can actually use it as an emissive kind of like texture above everything. So if I turn off my lights, again, we're getting that beautiful global illumination that really, it's such a subtle but beautiful effect. And I can use any texture I want. So I can, go back to this texture or maybe like my original blue texture. And get that kind of like illumination on top of it. I can also control the color, so I can make it like, different color based on whatever I'm doing on OSC. So super powerful, obviously. And bear with me while this goes a little bit slow while I switch. But now I can also switch to, let's say, that Glass Crane one that we were looking at, and get some really dynamic looking effects here. Now, this is an emissive texture above my texture. So let's just look at the difference, right? This is my texture that I'm using, right? And this is the kind of like emissive texture that I'm putting on top of it. So if I had the lights on, the effect is kind of much more subtlified. But if I turn it off, we can get that global illumination I was talking about. And then what I can do is, even more impressively, is make this the texture. So now, if I turn off the emissiveness, okay, now we have no lights, right? But if I turn on the lights, now I'm actually getting that texture as the texture of the model, and I can control the, metallic look of it, or the roughness of it. Let's put the metallic back so I can make it like super metallic. I can even take the color out of it. And bear with me again while this gets all chunky while I touch designer. Let me make the details off so we can kind of see a little bit more here and go a little bit faster. So as you can see, I'm now like able to get a completely new and interesting look by just controlling, the parameters of the roughness metallic and the different kind of like things that are going on here. And again, because this is a texture, it now works with my lighting, obviously. So my lighting is kind of creating that beautiful, shimmer over the metallic. If I turn the metallic off, get like a little bit of a different type of effect, but it now works with my physics, with my forces. So I can kind of like, start playing with different aspects of it. For me, this is very enjoyable and fun. Okay, enough about textures and physics. Lame. Where's the Merkabas, bro? I know everybody wants the Merkabas. Well, I have other things to show, but I guess I'll just show the Merkabas quickly. So what are Merkabas and why am I talking about them so much and why am I so excited about them? A big part of what I like to do with my projection mapping and kind of like my shows, I want to have like some sort of character. This is kind of like going back to my film days where that was important to me. So I kind of have my characters in the form of Merkabas. Merkabas are 3D shapes. They're actually very simple geometry. They're just made out of two tetrahedrons flipped on top of each other. And they form a very sacred and powerful geometry that is prevalent in lots of different forms of nature and nanostructures. It does come from the Kabbalah as a shape, but there are a lot of different opinions about if it comes from earlier than Kabbalah, because it's been found in different types of inscriptures and carvings that predate the origins of Kabbalah. So it's a very powerful structure. I can get into the more esoteric aspect of it, but maybe I'll save you all that. You can check out my podcast for that kind of stuff. So I use them as kind of like a character in my scenes. So let me just turn on one here. Let's do this one. This is the classic. So this Merkaba is a three-dimensional object. This one is a mechanic one, so it can kind of transform a little bit. Opens up. I can move this around, and now if you notice, it is going through the stage. One of the things that I really want to have is the kind of interaction between the stage and the characters. And the way that I'm achieving that is kind of like, again, by this kind of like physics where, the Merkaba can kind of like push the pieces away and the pieces kind of come back in their fashion. You kind of have this kind of like interesting dynamic between the two where, they're kind of like pushing and pulling, and the object is kind of like pushing things in and out. I also have all these particles here. Let's kind of bring them to their proper resting spot, which is kind of like following the Merkaba around. And as you see, the Merkaba can go in and out of the stage and kind of create this nice kind of like fluid, physically based interaction where the pieces are kind of being pushed and moved based on this kind of like shape. And I can also use more of a random kind of positional data instead of the LFO. So this is one of my Merkabas. Can also different, orientations. And I can also maybe remove a little bit of the spring. So now when the Merkaba punches into parts of the stage, it kicks the pieces all over the place and creates empty space, which is really nice for projection mapping, empty space. And this is kind of like more organic empty space where the empty space is being made by, this kind of like object. And then I can also obviously add in my noise that I had before, so I can kind of layer on different things. And I'll show one more Merkaba here before we go. This is my cables Merkaba. So it's kind of like this, a little bit less crazy, but it's this Merkaba that is attached by these cables. And as you can see, these cables kind of have a little bit of a life of their own. They kind of are, again, interacting physically based to the scene, kind of giving off this kind of like almost matrixy kind of vibe. They can be more fluid, they could be more strict. And a really cool part of what they can do is they can, let's kill the lights for a second. They can do this kind of like cool pulsing effect, and I can control obviously the speed of that, the amount of kind of like things that are happening here. Maybe let's make it a little bit slower, slow things down here. And again, because I have Lumen, which is built into Unreal, I have the ability to do this kind of like almost global illumination trick where the cables themselves are kind of illuminating the stage in this very kind of like free form dynamic way. And I can also like give it a little bit of light if I want to, but you kind of see how powerful that is. And if I kind of reduce this metallicness and kind of just make it, just kind of like no metallic, no roughness, you kind of get to see how much that is affecting different parts of the stage and kind of really creating this very unique and interesting kind of looking thing. And yeah, I'm really proud of it. I love my Merkabahs. I'll show you one more just as a treat. This one was designed by Raymond's Symmetric Vision. It's the Snake Merkabah, we'll call it. And this one kind of has this very nice, unique kind of feel. Let's give it a little bit of light. This one's kind of much more simple. It's more of a follower kind of effect where the snake pieces are kind of following the Merkabah, but I kind of control how much they're following, how much they're rotating. And again, this creates a lot of fun and interesting vibes. Again, we get this very nice and fluid kind of lighting that the pieces are lighting parts of the stage dynamically. It really creates a really nice 3D effect. And I also can make them do this kind of fun, if this is going to work. Yeah. It's kind of like now they're kind of reacting with physics as well. So they kind of, as you can see, they kind of intersect with each other in a kind of interesting way where they're kind of like, they're kind of like not really sure what to do with each other. And then if I go all the way to the end, they kind of almost disappear into themselves. So yeah, that's my Merkabahs. I'm very happy with them. I really like the way that they interact with the stage and kind of create this kind of like dynamic feeling. And I think that's it for my showcase.
Amazing. That was incredible. Really cool to see. Before we let you go, tell us a little bit about the visual cast and how it came to be and where people can find it.
So the visual cast came to be, I've been wanting to do a podcast for a while since I started listening to podcasts, really. Everybody wants to do a podcast. 10 years ago when I was in the military, I did one with a friend. We did one episode and never picked it up again. And I always had the dream of doing like a, visuals podcast. I have been following this podcast, your podcast, for a while and kind of, felt that I could add something to the world of podcasts by doing something a little bit different, by focusing on a wide variety of guests, and eventually making it into something that's like a more of an interactive thing. Like the real goal for the visual cast is to become a live streamed podcast where I can take questions from the audience. I can take suggestions from the audience. I have all these gags and goofs in my podcast. I want to make it more interactive with the audience. So that was kind of the gist. And, from doing it now, I'm on episode 17 or 18. I am realizing that like the more that I interview people, the more that I have conversations with people, the more I get better at what I'm doing. Maybe it's like being inspired by people. Maybe it's talking to people at a high level. I think that just like the act of conversing with people similar to you in your field gets different cogs turning. So, if nothing ever comes out of it, then at least I'll just become a better visual artist. But I really hope that your audience, anybody watching, will check it out. Please like comment, tell me what I'm doing wrong, tell me what I'm doing right. Give me suggestions, tell me who you want to see on the cast. Besides creating a platform, inspiring people, allowing artists that didn't always have a voice outside of their art to have a voice, I really want to create an interactive experience with an audience.
Yeah, amazing. It really is it's an incredible show. You have a really insane lineup of people on there. The variety is incredible. I mean, First episode was a demo in Mandelbulb that blew my fucking mind. The way that he thinks about like compositing with
Crazy.
Mandelbulb
It's
is
crazy.
nuts. And there's been Notch, Touch Designer, Unreal, Blender,
Yeah.
Resolume,
We're even getting into like
stage design, like
CNC Rhino and
yeah,
parametric
Rhino,
design
everything, all things visual, and the set segment is really interesting, and the post set segment is where things get real interesting. There's always some esoteric and bizarre subject matter that comes
for
up
sure.
in the back half. So stick around to the end. Yeah, just check it out. I love seeing new voices pop up in this world. So
I will
more,
say, I think the biggest difference is that your podcast is highly produced in a good way. It's produced in the way that like it's cut in a way that I can just like listen and get like, okay, who is this guy? Who is this girl? What do they do? What do they do? And that's so valuable because I want to sometimes just like get the elevator pitch of that person. But what I try to do is, and this is why I'm able to release an episode every week, I don't edit my shows. Sometimes cut out when we go to the toilet or something, but I try to keep everything in because I want it to feel like a conversation, and less of an interview, even though I am interviewing them, and kind of have a little bit more of a window into, besides just like how they make art and how they think about art, but also like what are their belief systems? How do they raise kids? How do they approach an out of body experience or a psychedelic experience, or anything kind of in that vein? I spoke to a friend of mine from Israel, Mini UV, about Israel. I wanted to have that kind of like quote unquote podcast, long form conversation, a la Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman, whatever. I'm not anything like those guys, but I am inspired by them. And I felt like it was something that wasn't available for our milieu. So yeah, thank you. I'm happy that you enjoy it, Sean, because really, like, you have been the inspiration to do it. Like thinking about doing it, watching your show, and like, okay, you know what, I can do this. Like, I'm gonna do this. It just gave me like the confidence and inspiration, really. So thank you.
hell yeah, man. I appreciate that. Thank you. I hope everyone watches these and thinks if this idiot can do it, so can I. All right. Rapid fire. What's MIDI controller is closest to your body right now?
The MIDI fighter.
Is that the favorite?
It is at the moment. It is. I did like you did a review of the Intech. I think they're
Mm,
awesome. I actually had them for a tour 2 years ago. I had to get them back because of the knobs that aren't smooth. It just drove me crazy. And they have a smooth version, but they're not endless. So the MIDI
yeah,
Fighter answers both of those things with smooth knobs and endless. And I should say, and it's not rapid fire, but I should say,
they
um,
never are.
the Intech guys, Christoph, he is a lovely guy, and he has confirmed that probably by next year they will have endless smooth encoders. So I will definitely be buying them when they do. But
Hell yeah.
MIDI fighter
That
for now for sure.
that is the only thing about them that really bugs me. Everything else
Yeah,
is so fun.
so nice, so nice. The software, the way that they interconnect. I have an APC 40. I have two. I just don't. I never use them. They're too big to travel with, and I don't use half of the buttons on it, so it never felt like I'm a knob guy.
Mm. You are a knob. No. Uh,
I set you up for that one.
yeah, I had to. I'm sorry. What is your favorite communication protocol?
OSC for sure.
OSC all
Yeah,
day?
hands down, all day, all day. You can't
What?
beat it. I mean, it's just like you can send any form of data fast, low latent, you know, it's not very expensive, like it's not very big packets. You definitely can over send packets, kind of like what I was showing with before with the Unreal thing. You can send, like, I've had projects where I'm sending like 500 messages, and that can bog down your network pretty much. But it's like we're talking about like 10 kil, it's never going to reach a megabyte of information. It's like instead of being 1 kilobyte, it's like 15 kilobytes. It's not like a huge thing, but it does become a lot.
All right. You have to delete all the softwares except one. What are you
Oh my
keeping?
God. Dude, don't do that to me. Fuck. Probably, I mean, at this point, I'd say Unreal I'd keep just because it's like almost a DCC at this point. You can kind of model in it. In 5.4, you can do like UVs and different types of like modeling stuff. So I would probably keep Unreal just because I can basically, with enough time and internet, I could probably do anything with it.
Mm-hmm.
But touch, yeah, I'd have Touch Designer running as well. I'm sorry, I broke the rule, but
Touch Designer must be smuggled in,
yeah.
must be saved. Yeah. You can't not pick Touch Designer, but Unreal is it's got all the things
It's got all the things. It really does.
almost.
Even though
Um,
annoying it can be sometimes.
let's get a little bit freaky. Favorite past or present mind-altering substance.
Oh my God.
Off the record, neither of us has ever experimented with mind-altering substances.
So, I try to look at substances as like a spiritual practice. I know it's like very like lame and whatever, but I try to, and I very rarely will take any mind-altering substance outside of a ceremony. I don't want to sound like pretentious. It doesn't have to be a plant medicine ceremony. It could be a ceremony that I make for myself with my friends, or when I go to festivals and obviously I'm going to have to do mind-altering substances. I try to make a ceremony around it. And that could just be like a small intention, a small prayer before. So that being said, I love Wachuma or mescaline, San Pedro, kind of like that plant. And the synthetic form of mescaline I love very much too. But it's the synthetic form is very hard to get a hold of. And the plant itself, it's very, I'm not gonna go to a festival with a bottle of cactus juice. Although I have done that before, so maybe I would, but definitely the mescaline variety.
We love that. Where do you like to do your mapping? You a Resolume guy? You a Grand VJ, Mad Mapper? Can you do that shit with Touch Designer? I
Yes,
don't, yeah.
I use Touch Designer for mapping, yeah. Sometimes I do shoot myself in the foot with it. With any process, I'll always have a plan A and plan B. And if plan A doesn't work, I'll go to plan B. My plan B for mapping is Resolume, just because of how fast and simple it is. But I'll always start in Touch Designer. And in Touch Designer, I have a plan A, B, C, and D. So my plan A is Cam Snapper, which is a 3D mapping tool. You take a model, you have points on the model, and you can kind of match those points in the physical space to the 3D model. And then it does a calculation and puts a camera in the 3D space. I love it because it allows me to then take my mapping and keep it in the 3D world and not put it into the 2D world. And because it's a very simple result of just a camera and a 3D model, I can take it into any 3D software after. But Cam Snapper fails many, many, many times when you don't have an exact 3D model to the stage that you're, or whatever the object. So architecture, perfect. If I have a time to get a photogrammetry model, perfect. If it's a model made by Bjorn, that's exact, that his 3D model is exactly the model that he makes in real life, perfect. But a lot of times, the model that you get from the designer is not the exact model that you have in physical space. So if Cam Snapper doesn't work, I'll go to Stoner. I'll start in Cam Snapper and then I'll use Stoner inside of Touch Designer, which is a warping tool. It's a very rudimentary edge warp tool, but you can actually make grid in it so you can, warp in the middle of a texture. And then if I'm feeling like I really want to not use Resolume, I'll use, I don't even remember what it's called, but it's another mapping tool that uses vectors, basically a slice mapper. But I'll probably get frustrated with that within 10 minutes and then just do it in Resolume.
Nice. Yeah, that's pretty good stack of tools. I feel like you could get most jobs done between those three.
Oh, definitely.
I know basically nothing about Touch Designer, but
Do you use Mad Mapper?
no, I'm just yeah, I'm. I'm a basic bitch Resolume user
Yeah,
all
well,
the way
your
through and
basic
through.
bitch skills have gotten you pretty far, my friend. So,
They do all right. Yeah, I don't know. Haven't really messed around. When I first started out, I tried all the things, but I don't know. Resolute just made sense to me, so I
yeah.
kept going. I'm not really code brain guy. I'm a color shape brain guy. So like, pretty green interface was nice. I like it. Little squares, clicky
Clicky,
clicky.
clicky.
I like it. Toss some effects on there. Woo. Now I'm a VJ. Notch the same way. I was like, ooh, I like Cinema 4D and like X particles and things like that. And then I open up Notch and it has a
It's that.
cloner and it has a particle system
Yeah.
and I can press play and I don't have to wait like all
Oh,
day to see
yeah.
how my particle system works.
Yeah.
It's
There's nothing
like
better than that.
sold, give me that. And then I looked at the price tag and I wanted to kill myself. But here we are, still paying for it. Anyway, rant over. Ooh, one thing I like to ask about is it's not really rapid fire, but do you have a secret sauce item? It's either a plugin or a tool not a lot of people use, or it could be a book, anything that's
Wow.
your secret sauce
Um,
that you'd be willing to share with the world? Something you do a little differently.
I'm a pretty basic bitch too. I just follow tutorials and trends. I'd say secret sauce, really that thing that I showed right now with the UVs is like I've never seen anybody do that. Like the actual thing is not special, but like the way that it's being used is. But I do like to use in Unreal. There's this great plugin, Ultra Dynamic Sky, but it's not like anything special. It's not like
That is
I don't know. I don't
that is the
know.
sauce though. It's it. I use that in every project.
Yeah,
But
it's a good
yeah.
one. Okay. I'll say for Unreal, a secret sauce that I have is ray trace shadows. I don't know if that's a secret sauce. I don't know. It's just like when you make a new project, if you just do ray tracing enabled, then you get all the settings loaded in for you, and then the lights just look really. No, that's stupid. That's not interesting. Oh,
That's the
Sean, you
way to
threw me
go.
on a loop here. You threw me on a loop here.
That is a good that's a question I like to ask people. When you start a new Unreal project from the menu, what are you picking? Do you have just like a template project that you always start
No,
from,
I
or
use yeah,
are
yeah. I
you
use
going like live events? Are you going architecture? Are you
no.
going games?
I'm using like the cinema like the ICVFX one.
Hmm.
Because it has a lot of stuff for rendering and for real time that I really like. And then I'll make sure to lock my frame rate. I'll make sure to check the ray tracing to make sure that everything's selected. Oh, okay, here I have one. Secret sauce Unreal. When you install the program, editor settings, you turn on the FPS in editor. It's in the editor settings, not the project settings. And it's called
Settings, man. There's 87,000 checkboxes in there. You got to remember which one it is.
No, this is like the best shit. It basically gives you a FPS counter on the top bar of the UI, so you don't have to manually turn it
Oh
on.
yeah.
It's such a good one. And secret sauce, by the way, I would say it's not so secret, but Substance Painter. And if you know Photoshop, you can learn Substance Painter. I'm not even joking, in an hour, okay? Because all it is Photoshop with a 3D model. It's so freaking good and powerful. And if anybody wants to learn it in an hour, shoot me a message. I'll teach it to you in an hour.
RIP your inbox.
Editor preferences, search, show frame rate and memory. So again, you go edit, editor preferences, search, show frame rate and memory, and then it will basically give you a readout of the FPS on the UI of Unreal Engine.
Yes, that's a good one. I forgot about that one. I used to use that all the time at XR.
It's important.
I think I like wiped some of my memory when I left that place. I, like unlearned
Never
half
forget,
of Unreal just out of spite.
never
And
again.
I don't know why get in this headspace about that place. But I loved all of those people. It just was very stressful.
Yeah, it's
Mostly because
productions.
I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I like faked my way into that job so hard. It
You're
was
like,
like
COVID, I need a
so
job.
stressful. Oh yeah. One of those say yes, figure it out later situations. But hey, it worked. It worked. Fuck it. Anything else? Anything we haven't talked about that you wish we did? Boxers or briefs, Coke or Pepsi?
I don't like any of that stuff. I don't wear underwear.
Free balling and a Sprite, please. Yes.
I don't drink soda. I really don't like sugar. I
Yes.
love sugar, but I don't drink soda. I drink a lot of kombucha,
Mm.
a lot of booch, a lot of booch.
We'll end it off, I suppose, as I do sometimes. If you could say one last thing to everybody, what would you say to them?
I love you all very much. I feel super, 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 super lucky to be able to do any of this, especially like to be able to do it as a career and like support my family. It sounds so cliche, but it's really because of the people, whether it's performing for the people or whether it's making systems for people. I'm grateful. So thank you for watching. Check out the visual cast. Check out my work on remvisuals.com. And yeah, I mean, I've said this a lot, but Sean, thank you so much for doing this podcast, for making a like tentpole statement of like what the visual arts are, what VJs are, all your supplemental content of the tutorials and your reviews of things, all the funny stuff that you make, like all the meme stuff. Really, like, thank you so much for doing it. It's so much work. I don't even realize how much work it is, and my thing is not even edited. So, the fact that you're doing it like this, like, I appreciate it so much, and I'm a huge fan. And this is I'm like giggly. I'm like excited to be on this show.
Hell yeah. Thank you so much. Like, subscribe, come back later for more videos. Peace.